contact, and contempt. It began with a shadow across the sky. When the Velthary fleet arrived in Earth's orbit, the world held its breath. Shimmering like liquid chrome and spanning kilometers in diameter, their dreadnoughts blocked out the sun in major cities. Entire countries fell into temporary dusk beneath their presence. They made no effort to hide. No stealth, no warning, just superiority. From a United Nations orbital station, Earth's representatives tried diplomacy. Ambassador Lee stood before the first transmission, broadcasting peace in over 40 languages. Her voice was calm, respectful, cautious. The reply came in perfect English, tinged with condescension. This is not a negotiation. Your species is hereby annexed under Directive 12 of the Velthary Dominion, compulsory integration of lesser civilizations. The ambassador protested. The reply was chilling. Your level of development is quaint. Fire-propelled explosives? Combustion engines? Magnetic slugs? Are you a relic species? They laughed. Millions across the globe watched, stunned, as the Velthary broadcast humanity's military data back at them. Grainy satellite images of tanks, missile silos, and aircraft. We commend your historical interest. You will make excellent museum specimens. The attack began an hour later. They didn't need armies. They had drones, orb-shaped, whisper-quiet death machines that blinked into cities using localized teleportation pulses. Plasma bursts tore through defense systems before alarms could even be sounded. Tanks melted. Jets turned into fireballs. Military satellites were blinded in a single coordinated flash. Moscow, Washington, London, New Delhi, Beijing. Each city watched its sky fill with blinding white clouds before vanishing into ruin. Casualties were catastrophic. No warning. No chance. Within 24 hours, Earth had lost 60% of its military infrastructure. But even worse than the destruction was the mockery. The Velthary released a second transmission, this time to the entire Galactic Council. A broadcast showed human weapons lined up in a Velthary exhibit hall. Tanks, mortars, even nuclear bombs suspended in magnetic display fields. Holographic Velthary children walked past, giggling. Primitive, kinetic, obsolete. Back on Earth, survivors dug through rubble. Communications faltered. Panic surged. In a secured underground facility deep in the Rocky Mountains, the remaining global military leadership gathered, scarred, burned, and angry. Among them was General Elena Marquez, commander of the North American Defense Grid. Her uniform was scorched at the shoulder, her left hand still bandaged from a drone ambush in D.C. Her voice cut through the tension. They think this is over. Silence. They think we're beaten because our weapons use metal instead of light. Because we bleed instead of spark. Because we're made of bone, not chrome. She turned to the others, representatives from the EU, China, India, Africa, and even former rivals now unified by survival. Let me remind you who we are. On the wall, she pulled up historical footage. Grainy black and white images of Stalingrad. Color footage of D-Day. Satellite views of trench lines in the Middle East. Civil wars, revolutions, global conflicts. We've been through hell before, each time crawling out with nothing but grit and iron. We've fought empires with knives. We've defended freedom in mud and blood. And when our backs are to the wall, we don't surrender. She slammed her hand on the table. We adapt. We resist. And when the time comes, we strike back. The lights flickered as the facility went dark for a moment. Signs of continued orbital interference. The room held its breath. Then backup generators kicked in. One by one, officers stood. Faces grim. Determined. Project Iron Roar, Marquez said. Activated. Across the globe, hidden bunkers, silos, and forgotten Cold War-era depots began to awaken. Mechanical lifts hissed. Turbines groaned to life. Old analog systems, immune to digital corruption, were dusted off. Engineers in worn-down overalls and scientists long thought retired began working under torchlight and pressure. The Velthary had underestimated one thing: humanity's refusal to die quietly. In the ruined city of Warsaw, A teenager used a slingshot to disable a Velthari scout drone. In the hills of Pakistan, tribal fighters began coordinating via radio frequencies too low-tech for alien sensors to detect. In Nevada, a decommissioned howitzer was being repurposed to launch EMP shells, guided by nothing but wind charts and raw calculation. And deep below Colorado, Marquez stood watching a missile slowly rise into launch position, its metal body scratched, dented, and deadly. A technician beside her grinned. They said our artillery was outdated. Marquez didn't smile. Good. Let them laugh. We'll answer in thunder, resistance, and rediscovery. The world was cracked, but not shattered. As the Velthari tightened their grip, major cities lay in ruins, their steel skeletons jutting into gray skies. Earth's skies were quiet now, not with peace, but with suppression. The orbital drones still hovered, scanning, enforcing, ready to strike again. But beneath the surface, humanity stirred. In the Carpathian Mountains, an old Soviet-era bunker groaned open, hydraulic doors scraping against rust and time. Inside, engineers and soldiers moved among cold concrete and flickering halogen lights. They wore mismatched uniforms, some NATO, some local militia, some civilian clothes with patches sewn on, but all bore the insignia of Project Iron Roar. The mission was simple: revive the weapons of a forgotten age. Weapons that didn't rely on software. Weapons the Velthari couldn't predict or control. We don't need smart weapons, said Colonel Iyad Farouk, adjusting the sight on a refurbished 1960s field gun. We need weapons that work. In an underground hangar in Brazil, a fleet of decommissioned fighter jets, F-16s, MiGs, Harriers, were being stripped of computerized systems and rigged for manual control. Pilots were retrained to fly with analog instruments, relying on pure instinct and muscle memory. Satellite jamming? Irrelevant. These machines didn't need guidance from space. In Siberia, a group of Russian engineers hauled a Tsarist-era cannon from a war memorial, welding a modernized EMP payload into its barrel. It was a Frankenstein of metal and fury, rusty, bulky, but alive. They named it Babushka's Revenge. Meanwhile, resistance cells coordinated via underground radio stations. Using AM bands and Morse code, messages crackled from mountain ranges to deep forests. Velthari patrol in Berlin destroyed using explosive traps. Retaliation Squad Alpha reports successful ambush near Kyoto. MO low, morale high, continue resistance. In war-torn Africa, Maasai tribesmen rode motorbikes rigged with mortars. In Detroit, former factory workers turned auto plants into weapon forges, crafting analog railguns from scrap metal. In India, rural villagers used ancient knowledge of terrain to lead Velthari scouts into dead-end valleys rigged with traps. What the Velthari saw as disorganized chaos was in truth a pattern, a swarm, an evolving threat. On board the Velthari command vessel, orbiting silently above Earth, High Strategist Exarun reviewed reports from the surface. His multi-lensed eyes blinked in disbelief as data poured in. Human kinetic weapons were beginning to destroy Velthari patrol craft. Impossible, Exarun muttered. They're using fire and steel. They should be irrelevant. His aide shifted nervously. Our AI systems are unable to predict their movements. Their analog tactics are erratic, uncalculable. Exarun turned toward the viewport, watching Earth's surface pulse with distant flashes. They are improvising, adapting. His mandibles clicked in frustration. They do not understand defeat. In the underground command bunker near the Rocky Mountains, General Marquez listened to the latest reports. Eastern Europe is holding. South American resistance is gaining ground. Multiple alien outposts disabled using analog pulse bombs. She leaned over a table scattered with paper maps, red pins marking victories, black pins for loss. It's working, said Lieutenant Hamza, her intelligence officer. They can't jam paper. They can't trace pencils. Marquez gave a rare smile. We were never fighting on their terms. That was their mistake. A technician interrupted, holding out a dusty tablet with shaking hands. Ma'am, you'll want to see this. On the screen was drone footage, grainy but clear. A Valkyrie transport ship shot out of the sky above the Ural Mountains, crashing in flames. The weapon? A manually fired howitzer. The shell had been loaded by hand. No targeting system, just mathematics and hope. Marquez's eyes lit up. Get that footage broadcast everywhere. Every device, every back channel, every underground signal. Let Earth see it. Across the globe, people huddled in shelters and ruins, watching flickering screens and static-filled broadcasts. This is not the end. Humanity fights back. They called us primitive. They will remember us as relentless. The message was clear. Earth had struck back. In a garage somewhere in Tehran, a mechanic-turned-rebel watched the footage and raised a wrench into the air. In a ravaged slum in Lagos, a grandmother passed a Molotov to her grandson, whispering, "For Earth." In Seoul, engineers hacked apart a fallen drone, discovering its weakness. Plasma regulators overheated with concentrated shockwaves. All over Earth, the myth of alien invincibility was beginning to crack. Back in the Rocky Mountain bunker, Marquez gathered her officers. "We have a narrow window. They still think we're weak. We're going to show them what our outdated weapons can really do." She tapped a control panel, bringing up Earth's last functioning orbital railgun. It was hidden in the shadows of the moon, never detected because it had been shut down decades ago. "If we can power this up and target their command ship," gasps fill the room. "It'll be the first blow they never recover from." As night fell across the shattered Earth, people looked up, not in fear, but in defiance. The stars were still there. The moon still shone. And somewhere up there, behind that moon, Earth's answer was preparing. Not in silence, not in surrender, but in steel. Retaliation. It began with a thunderclap in space. The Valkyrie command ship, Druvax Ascendant, sat cloaked on the dark side of the moon. Its sensor arrays swept Earth every 3 seconds, tracking movement, energy spikes, and signs of uprising. Despite recent anomalies, High Strategist Exarun remained confident. After all, what could a species armed with gunpowder and iron truly accomplish? Then, at 3 o'clock GMT, the orbital railgun buried in the lunar crust awoke. Silently, unnoticed, until it fired. The magnetic scream of the slug launch could not be heard in the vacuum, but its consequences echoed across space. A 50-kilogram tungsten rod, traveling at 25,000 kilometers per hour, punched through the Valkyrie flagship like a divine spear. Its shields barely registered the kinetic anomaly before the slug carved through reactor cores, shattered power conduits, and detonated internal fuel systems. The Druvax Ascendant exploded. The flash lit Earth's night sky. Across continents, survivors paused, eyes wide, as a new star briefly flared above the horizon. In bunkers and ruins, across resistance channels and whispered radios, a single word spread. "We hit them." General Elena Marquez stood in the Lunar Control Center, eyes fixed on the viewport. She hadn't blinked since the impact. Her voice was calm, level electric. "Begin Operation Thunderpulse." Across Earth, every remaining resistance cell moved at once. In Poland, refurbished artillery divisions rolled out of the forests. The thunder of manually loaded cannons echoed through the countryside. In Morocco, camel-mounted commandos stormed an alien garrison using World War II-era rifles and improvised explosives. In the Australian outback, Aboriginal trackers led squads through terrain no satellite could map, striking down Valkyrie scouts with surgical precision. Humanity had returned to its roots, brutal efficiency. No automation, no digital command chains, just sweat, steel, and strategy. In the American Midwest, an armored train thundered across forgotten rail lines. It carried a payload of converted nuclear shells, rigged not to explode, but to generate devastating EMP waves. As it passed beneath a Valkyrie cruiser patrolling Kansas airspace, it launched one. The blast didn't kill anyone, but it killed every circuit on the alien ship. The cruiser dropped like a stone. Cheers erupted across the plains as farmers, militia, and soldiers swarmed the crash site and tore through its broken hull with axes and torches. One farmer, a man in his 60s, spat tobacco and muttered, "Outdated, huh? Try unplugged." In East Asia, an elite team, known as the Wraiths, carried out coordinated blackouts across alien bases. Dressed in blackout suits and carrying magnetic mines, they slipped past sensors and disabled teleportation grids by overloading power cores with copper wiring and chemical fuses. In Nairobi, a group of street kids hacked into an alien drone using salvaged radio parts, rerouting its targeting system to attack its own command tower. The Velthari didn't understand how. Their algorithms couldn't predict these outcomes. These humans were irrational, illogical, but above all, they were effective. On board the Velthari's secondary command ship, Voruan's Eye, Xaron watched reports stream in, each one worse than the last. Base Alpha, 3 lost. Cruiser Voxer down by artillery. Reactor sabotage in Sector Tau. Command ship destroyed. His breath hissed through clenched mandibles. "This isn't warfare," he growled. "It's a plague." One of his advisors stepped forward. "They're using kinetic strikes, analog targeting. Their tactics are unpredictable. Our AI systems can't counter them." Xaron stared at Earth below, rage boiling behind his 4 pupils. "Burn them. Burn their cities. No more patrols. Launch full eradication protocols." But even as his orders left his mouth, Earth's final gambit was in motion. In the snowy peaks of the Andes, 3 scientists and a retired military technician had cobbled together an anti-orbital launcher. It was ancient, built from submarine components and Cold War research. They called it Medusa. It was ugly. It was slow, but it worked. When it fired its kinetic payload, an old ICBM refitted with tungsten rods, it bypassed orbital defenses by mimicking space debris. It tore into Voruan's Eye minutes after Xaron issued his final command. The ship didn't explode. It simply fractured, then died, and with it, the Velthari command structure collapsed. For the next 48 hours, alien forces across Earth found themselves stranded, cut off from their fleet, leaderless, surrounded by terrain they never bothered to study, and enemies who knew every inch of it. They were picked off one by one. The once mighty Velthari troops, so proud, so advanced, were reduced to prey. Captured drones were pulled apart. Alien rifles were reverse-engineered with scrap metal. Humans began to integrate Velthari energy sources into artillery shells, creating unstable but deadly hybrid weapons. A final message was sent from Earth to the galactic network. A video. It showed a soldier, her face dirty, her armor patched together, loading an artillery shell with her bare hands. On the shell were the words, "Primitive? Watch this." She fired. The camera shook. The message ended. By the end of the week, the Velthari fleet had retreated. Those who couldn't escape were hunted down. Earth had bled, but Earth had endured, not because of its technology, but because of its people. Because when you strip away the comforts, the screens, the code, what's left is something alien empires never understood. Resolve. In the command bunker, as celebration erupted across radio waves, General Marquez sat with her team. She looked around at her bruised, exhausted, half-starved officers, and she smiled. They wanted a war of light. She gestured to the maps littered with shell fragments and boot prints. "We gave them a war of fire." Victory echoes. The stars were silent again, but not with fear. With awe. The Velthari had fled. Their command network shattered, their weapons grounded, their morale crushed by what they once deemed obsolete. Earth, scorched but unbeaten, stood tall amid its broken cities and buried dead. And yet, the war wasn't truly over. Victory brought its own battles. In Paris, where the Eiffel Tower's steel skeleton now served as a signal mast for resistance broadcasts, diplomats, soldiers, engineers, and civilians gathered beneath patched tents. The first meeting of the Unified Earth Assembly. No government had been spared, no country untouched. Nations that had once barely spoken were now brothers in arms, bonded by trench, bullet, and fire. General Elena Marquez, now hailed as a liberator, stepped forward to address the crowd. Her once pristine uniform was faded, worn threadbare by months of war. They came expecting compliance. They left learning defiance. She paused, letting silence fill the air. We were called backward, barbaric, broken. She raised a piece of shell casing, a fragment from the orbital railgun that had taken down the Druvax Ascendant. But it was this primitive shell that broke their spine. Thunderous applause followed, not just for her words, but for the reality they represented. Humanity had done the impossible. Across the planet, the reconstruction had begun. In what remained of New York, volunteers cleaned rubble and cleared twisted steel. Instead of machines doing the work, it was human hands, calloused and blistered. They sang old songs as they moved brick by brick, some laughing, others crying. Children drew chalk art on sidewalks, drawing tanks beside suns, missiles beside flowers. In a newly reclaimed Nairobi, a hybrid power generator, created from Velthury plasma cells and human analog circuitry, lit up entire neighborhoods for the first time in months. Locals cheered when it worked, then immediately began copying the design. A young Kenyan girl was the first to give a name. The Fireheart. The aliens had left behind more than wreckage. They had left behind knowledge. Velthury databanks, at first incomprehensible, were gradually deciphered, not by AI, which had proven brittle and vulnerable, but by humans trained in pattern recognition, cryptography, and even ancient linguistics. Within the alien code were files about other civilizations, those conquered, those resisting, and some still unknown. One name appeared repeatedly: the Drakari Confederation, a race that once stood proud, until they were shattered and erased by the Velthury. Humanity read the records with grim determination. "We will not be the next Drakari," said Lieutenant Hamza as he uploaded recovered data into Earth's first post-war archives. "We will be the last to fall and the first to rise." In the ruins of Shanghai, survivors gathered around a restored analog projector, powered by hand crank, playing old Earth films and newsreels. After weeks of silence, they needed laughter, faces, stories. When the footage of the Velthury flagship's destruction played, the crowd stood and saluted the screen. Some cried, some roared. One boy turned to his father and asked, "Will they come back?" The father nodded slowly. "Maybe, but this time they won't find a fractured Earth. They'll find a forge." Far above, satellites once meant for communication had been repurposed. They now formed a crude defense net, one incapable of tracking stealth ships, but more than enough to catch large-scale fleet movements. Controlled entirely by analog relays and operated by trained crews, it lacked the digital vulnerability of its predecessors. In orbit, Earth's engineers were building something more ambitious. A new station, not a weapon, a beacon, one that would send a message across the stars, not just to the Velthury, but to any race watching, wondering what became of Earth. "We are still here. We remember. We fought with what you mocked. We bled with what you feared. We rose with what you left behind. Humanity, unbroken, undone, unbound." Weeks passed, then months. Across the world, memorials rose, not to celebrate war, but to honor resilience. In Moscow, a statue was unveiled. A man holding a bolt-action rifle in one hand, a cracked alien helmet in the other. Beneath it, etched in steel. Outdated? No. Underrated. In Rio, they painted murals across entire buildings, depicting farmers pulling tanks, engineers building by candlelight, resistance fighters slashing through firestorms. And in Cairo, beneath the ruins of the old city, a museum opened, part archive, part warning. The first exhibit? A rusted artillery shell, the same one that had downed a Velthury ship. Its plaque read, "Retaliation, the human way." One final transmission reached Earth, weeks after the Velthury fled. A short, corrupted message, faint but undeniable. "To the humans of Seoul, you are not what we expected. We regret our assumptions. You are no longer prey. You are a threat." The assembly played the message across every screen, every public terminal, every corner of the recovering planet. Marquez stood before the broadcast, flanked by world leaders and resistance heroes. "They mocked our artillery," she said, "until they tasted our wrath. Let the stars remember. She raised her hand. Earth stands ready. And somewhere, far beyond the Sol system, others were watching. Some with fear, some with hope, but all with certainty. Humanity had entered the galactic stage, not as the weakest, but as the loudest echo of victory.